Good morning or afternoon, everyone, depending on where you are joining us from. I am Anupriya Rath, Demand Gen Manager at Everbridge, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar, Navigating Uncertain Climates, Strengthening Resilience Against Severe Weather Events. I'm excited to introduce our speakers, Matt Hovsepian, Senior Program Manager, Amazon Logistics, Kelly Williamson, GSOC Lead at Whole Foods Market, and our Everbridge subject matter expert, Brian Toolan. Before we start the webinar, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording of the webinar, along with our other detailed reports, would be available after the webinar within 48 hours. At the right bottom corner, there is a Q&A section where you can post all your queries, and we will get to them at the end of the presentation. Now, handing it over to Brian.
All right, thank you very much. I'm going to stop sharing this screen. All right, so good afternoon, good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Brian Toolan. I'm the Vice President of Public Safety for Everbridge, and I'm going to give Matt and Kelly an opportunity to introduce themselves. So Kelly, we'll go with you first. If you can just introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Kelly Williamson, and I work at Whole Foods Market. Been here for about 5 years, and I lead the GSOC for our company. It spans all of our locations across the US, Canada, and UK.
Nice. And Matt?
Hey everybody, I'm Matt Hovsepian. I'm with Amazon Logistics, our contingency response center, where I'm a senior program manager responsible for end-to-end disruption management. And principally what we look after are events that are happening in real time in the weather and non-weather space, communications to drivers to keep them safe, and then we also look at capacity management when we're disrupted by certain weather events and public safety events.
Very good, thanks. And thanks both of you again for joining today. Matt, I'm going to start with you. With Amazon, I would say probably the largest logistics company in the world, all right, and a frequent visitor to my address. You obviously operate a very massive fleet, globally. So with the different increases in severe weather, which obviously you have to be more concerned about just what happens in the US, right? But can you share some insight onto some of the different steps you guys take, some of the solutions you use in order to combat some of this and ensure that safety is key during these events?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I kind of want to first start by saying we need to acknowledge that weather is inherently difficult in a space where we like checklists and workflows and we like happy path solutions. We operate in a space where happy paths may result in what we want, but we need to be ready for when the weather does whatever it's going to do. So to that end, we kind of use a framework around plan, mitigate, recover. Planning is kind of our policy work. We do exercises, our playbooks, our field education piece, and where we've really found the success as we move into mitigation is how we've operationalized it to kind of create an environment where, though these abnormal and extreme events are occurring, we have a robust process in place by which we identify the hazard, we start coordination with our necessary stakeholders and partners, and really manage through the event so that we can, one, keep the transporters on the road safe, and then two, understand those bottom line metrics that we're concerned with and making sure that we mitigate the impact as best we can. So kind of within that, we have two different real program or processes that we really we operate in the weather space. First, when we look at things like tornadoes, considerable destructive thunderstorm warnings, flash flooding, we've developed mechanisms by which we can communicate at extremely low latency to drivers. And then kind of in the winter weather hurricane path, we've developed processes out where we identify the hazard 3 to 4 days in advance, and then we start our internal standard work process to really have a coordinated and calm response to those. You can imagine in a company as large as Amazon, there's a lot of different stakeholders, and so really organizing that response is where we've kind of found our niche in the space, and seen positive impacts in both the safety side and then in the business metrics side.
Nice, very good. And I can imagine, with trucks moving all the time, having to keep up with the location of those storms is, probably a huge challenge in itself, right? And getting that out timely is important. So makes a lot of sense. Thanks. So Kelly, similar, right, with Amazon, you're a very large global company. So from the Whole Foods perspective, again, timely deliveries are probably very critical on your side, and untimely deliveries probably end up on Facebook and next door, right? So trying to mitigate some of those, how are supply chain disruptions significantly caused by severe weather becoming a frequent issue across your area? With the recent winter storms and fires that we've seen in Texas, the fires we saw in Hawaii, flooding and mudslides in California, these are all huge, not only challenges for the day of the event, but ongoing challenges as it's tough to get into those areas after the fact. How is that something you're managing from the Whole Foods side?
Thanks, Brian. So I'll echo what Matt said. Weather, especially, seems like the past few years has become very unpredictable and a lot more violent, if you will. The hurricanes, like you mentioned, snowstorms and fires. I feel like we're constantly dealing with these large events that impact our stores, our customers, and our safety. So we at Whole Foods use the tools a little bit differently. We have a proactive response messaging from the BCC that does send out the storm warnings to our GSOC support teams. And that can be asset protection, that's usually leadership and store development if there's any damage to stores. So we really want to have that predictive data to make sure we can ensure safety. We also have a mechanism where stores actually report things from their end. So if something's happening on the ground, especially if it's sudden, flash floods or a tornado, they report it from the app to alert folks on our side in the leadership vein to let them know, hey, we're sheltering in place, or we might need some extra help to make sure the windows are boarded up. So we use kind of have data coming from both sides of the tools to keep us informed. If you're talking about a hurricane or a long-term winter storm that is, it's known to be coming, we were planning for it. I'll use hurricane as an example since those do affect us quite a bit. We have sort of a triage team that's constantly using BCC to map the storm, see which of our stores are in the path, and how we use it for supply chain. We can also, make sure our distribution centers understand which stores are closing. If our distribution centers are hit, the reverse, our stores may not have enough supply. And we also use it, our supply and stocking teams use it to say, okay, we know a hurricane is going to be in this area. We need to pre-stock with water. We need to pre-stock with emergency supplies. We need to make sure our customers and our stores have what they need to prepare for the storm. So it's very helpful. Our GSOC is fairly small and we rely on a lot of automation. So it's really helpful to alert the teams that we need to know in advance that, what's coming and where it's going to be.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of continuing on that, to that response review. So what measures do you take on the employee safety side, knowing that, your operations have to continue, things have to go on, but at the same time, your employees are caught up in that actual event, right? There's impacts to their, not only their own personal safety, but their living conditions in their area and friends and neighbors and families. So, what types of plans do you have around closing facilities, taking drivers off the road? How do you communicate with your employees to ensure you actually have enough employees to come back to work and open up for the day after or during an event?
That's me.
Yes, sorry, that's for you.
Again, with the recent weather catastrophes that have happened, I'll use Maui fires as an example. We have a couple of stores there. So obviously we were monitoring it very closely, making sure we were evacuated when necessary. One of our stores did evacuate, one of them didn't, but it enabled everyone to be in constant communication about these situations, make sure our employees were safe before they came back to work. We even had a community outreach program there to give funding to those that either lost their homes or were in a position where they couldn't be at home and had to stay in a hotel. So we really used the technology from Everbridge and the communication path to help us prepare for that and keep our TMs safe. And we do that similar in a hurricane. If there's a store that's in a hurricane path, close it. We don't tell our employees to come in. On the flip side, when the stores do reopen, there are some employees that can't make it in even if they're scheduled. So we do run into having to keep a store closed because we can't staff, but we do have a mechanism to keep all of our employees informed. Don't come into the store today. We want you to stay safe. So we really do look at our safety hazard as a priority, as well as our impact to our business.
Excellent. So Matt, same kind of question to you here on that. You obviously, your employees are more traveling outside of your warehouses and things of that nature with all the vehicles on the road and things of that. How do you guys ensure that, employee safety in your facilities and then just the well-being of your employees?
Yeah, it's really planning, right? It's planning and exercising and making sure that as we're going into these known hazard seasons. I got hurricanes fresh on the mind because we're just doing a doc review on our hurricane playbook and poking holes in that to make sure it's ready, right? So and what I've kind of just keep landing on is, whoop, my lights are going off. Excuse me, sorry about that. What I keep landing on is what I've noticed in the few years that we've really taken a proactive stance, we've been able to really stabilize our response ahead of time. And so that enables us to communicate more eloquently with affected partners, right? So you can imagine Amazon's a pretty large company, a lot of different stakeholders, one of which is our internal communications teams, right? Identifying who those stakeholders are because they change over they change over with attrition and moving into new roles. But it's really then in our plan, baselining and familiarizing them with this is how we operate. These are when you can expect to hear from us. We want to understand what we're exactly communicating to associates, and then kind of a little bit more bespoke nuance. The drivers are not actually employed by Amazon. And so we have, the gig economy drivers and the Flex app, which are independent contractors, which support the delivery operations for Kelly's business. And then we have our delivery service partners, which are the typical blue van drivers that you see that are dependent contractors. So we have a ton of co-employment legal risk that we have to kind of work through and make sure that we're not overly aggressive in telling independent, dependent contractors what to do, but more communicating, these are our plans. These are when we would like to have people off the road. These are the thresholds that we have for which we will continue to operate, because it's tough in the sense that we know that areas are going to be impacted by events, but we also understand that there are people that depend on Amazon for their medicine. There are people that depend on Amazon for their perishable and non-perishable goods. There are people that depend on Amazon to enable their recovery. And so for us, it's really putting a fine point on if we are going to cease our operations, when we're going to do that exactly, and then when we're going to resume our operations. And that's really where we start to leverage the data feed that's coming in from Everbridge. We're looking at what local municipality impact is, what areas are under evacuation zone, what areas have curfews in place, where's in a hurricane again, where's the guard been deployed, what's VCC telling us in terms of road conditions, what's the total ice that's on the road, we're looking at winter weather, what's the total snow on the road, where are roads closed down. And that's where we've kind of found some really supply chain opportunity through VCC to start automating those signals. For example, Donner Pass, Snoqualmie Pass, notorious for closing down, lots of volume in our middle mile space flowing to our last mile space. So we're able to kind of leverage that data set a little bit more eloquently to understand where we have those risk events going on, and then redirect line haul traffic to get ultimately to customers, which I'm imagining, out of the 171 people on here, there's probably more than a few that are Amazon customers.
Probably a few. So I would imagine too, for both of you having, tractor trailers and trucks on the road and things of that nature, wind speed is probably also a significant thing you're monitoring, right? Because there are, some state and federal laws around when certain types of vehicles have to be off the road due to wind speed. So I'm sure that's another, having to deal with multiple jurisdictions and understanding those policies. Very good. So Matt, I'm going to continue with you for a minute here. Kind of a shift gears here, but So over the recent years, Amazon has taken some proactive measures incorporating disclosures into your public financial filings. You highlight the significant influence of climate change on its operations as crucial risk factors. Notably, the company introduced fresh disclosures in 2023 financial reporting. Amazon emphasized that climate change might lead to fluctuations in its operating results due to increased costs associated with transitioning to a low carbon economy. How does this impact the work you're physically doing, your focus? How does the company's investment planning, turn around onto such a large logistical operation?
Yeah, I mean, I'm only one of a lot of people who work for this wonderful company, and so where I've seen like kind of the most impact on the operation is within our electric delivery vehicle fleet, our EDV fleet. Specifically when we start looking at extreme cold weather temperatures, batteries don't perform well in extreme cold. Conversely, in extreme heat, people want to stay cool. So we see increased demand on the vehicles. And so we're looking at the data and the analytics now. And we have been for probably the last year or so, in understanding how do we optimize, when we have those factors at play where we know we're going to see degraded performance. Similarly, as we kind of pivot and look into hurricanes, water and electricity don't necessarily mix. And so how are we looking at that? How are we looking at power regeneration? And how are we positioning power regeneration when the grid goes down, right? Because to my earlier point, customers depend on Amazon, and our obligation is to make sure that we get volume and capacity flowing to customers as soon as safely possible, so that we can get customers what they need. And so I'm kind of one little small piece of that pie, but I've really noticed it significantly in our electric vehicle delivery planning.
Very nice, thanks. So you both mentioned earlier, you leverage the Everbridge Visual Command Center. For those who might not know the VCC platform, that contains a lot of risk intelligence, allows for business processes to be placed. So Kelly, can you speak a little bit on, how some of those public sector feeds, you both kind of mentioned, some of that public sector government type of feeds, but how does that aid in your overall operational decision making? And how does it influence some of the decisions you make, from a company perspective?
Sure. So I'll go back a little and agree with Matt. We have significant tabletop exercises before each hurricane season. We're already starting to think about those so we can get our process in place. But weather is not predictable a lot of times. So we do rely on VCC to constantly be combing those third-party data sources, primarily weather, also crime. We use the road closures that alert our distribution centers if a road's closed, or our stores, just so we can keep a pulse on where there's a potential disruption and potentially redirect the supplier if it has to be, it's going to be cut off. We can share products from store to store, make sure that we're as stocked as we can be in those situations. But like I said earlier, we rely a lot on automation. So we have the winter advisories from the Weather Service constantly alerting our team so we can see if something changes path, or there's a hurricane we know is coming, but a tornado just spun up out of it, or we can keep and from a planning perspective and a triage perspective, weeks before it starts, to end the moment situations that we need to provide immediate access, immediate safety for our customers and team members. And we know, we need to shut that store down. It needs to stay closed for a few days. And even for crime, we look at the crime databases locally and nationally to understand, is there a shooter within 5 miles of our store? Or is there a civil unrest? We have a lot of PETA protests, so we get information about that. We can plan ahead and say, hey, a protest is scheduled for that day, or our stores notify us directly. There's a protest in front of the store. Do we need to close down? What do we need to do? Do we need to, how do we need to protect our customers and our employees? So we rely a lot on the VCC feeds to really help us stay on top of that, since we do have such small teams for support here.
Very good. So Matt, kind of on the same token, I know you've already mentioned a lot of the different capabilities you use. Just curious from my perspective, I worked in the government for 25 years. And then now being here at Everbridge, I'm curious as to along that line of what information benefits you for your operational resilience, but what information do you feel is the most beneficial that comes from the government, or maybe could be enhanced a little better to help you make decisions earlier or more efficiently?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because the obligation of government and the obligation of business are two separate ones, but they intersect, right? When you have these kind of things going on. And so to answer the first question, what are we getting from the government? It's evacuation orders and notices. It's travel advisories and travel bans that we're getting from VCC. And each name 10 different cities, and I'll name you 10 different ways and 10 different tools that each one of those municipalities are doing. There's no one set federal standard for how government conveys this information to affected parties. And so where Everbridge has really helped us is scraping that data and organizing it in VCC so that we can maintain that overall situational awareness. I go back to like last week and what Texas was experiencing, right, with the wildfires. So we're managing, those wildfires and coordinating with the sites. We also have, winter weather in, I believe, the Northwest, and then we had tornadoes in the Midwest. And so VCC helps us maintain situational awareness over all of those events, and then do our coordination and our standard work with the parties that are affected. But it helps decrease the cognitive load on our operators through the back end automation that we already have. And so we don't lose visibility on, this road has closed because of this, whatever event. We're just flowing those signals directly to whoever needs that, so that our operations team can maintain focus on, the principal priorities of keeping folks safe, and making sure capacity is ready and volume is flowing.
Okay, nice. So the next kind of question I have, I'm going to throw out, again, back in my time working for a state level government, we experienced a blizzard that came on I wouldn't say out of nowhere, right? We knew it was coming. However, the timing of it changed significantly and came in a lot earlier than we expected, and from the government perspective, it was about getting employees out, right? We have an operational requirement to maintain roads and highways and things of that nature and keep them clean. However, due to the timing, right, we ended up actually making it worse. Everybody got on the road at the same time. It bottlenecked traffic for almost 2 or 3 days just because of how significant amount of snow we received. So how does that timing affect you? I would imagine, you're not really sitting there waiting for the government to tell you got to send employees home because there's a snowstorm coming, or there's other significant weather, but how do you manage, with a large employee workforce? And I understand it's scattered across the world, but how do you manage making sure you're getting them home safely or getting them out of the area safely, before the impact? Is there different solutions you're looking at where you're getting the modeling yourself, you're not waiting on the government? Matt, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, we're pretty heavily invested in weather forecasts and data science behind weather forecasts, and parsing out what models historically perform better under what conditions. And so we kind of blend multiple different forecasts from multiple different sources based on what the data tells us is the best forecast. So I would say with bated trepidation, we really don't get caught in those situations. We might get caught in situations where, we thought it was going to be 4 inches of snow and 8 inches fell, right? And so we have some mobility challenges around that. But through the signaling that we're getting, and through the data work that we've done in understanding forecast risk, it's not as significantly challenging for us if we need to cease our operations or suspend our operations or modify our operations, because we're already looking at the event 3, 4, sometimes 5 days out. And we've already got those initial coordination mechanisms open and those communication lines open with whoever we know is a stakeholder or is a partner in that system. And so kind of like going back to like VCC, whenever we start seeing like all of those notifications coming through for, governments are shutting down, Sometimes it's like, hey, we're already prepared. And sometimes it's, okay, they're kind of reading this a little bit differently. And then it's getting ahead of like the messaging game and making sure that, we're getting those messages out. When these things get picked up by the media and we're not ahead of it, we're behind, right? Because then we're playing catch up with the narrative game that's already flowing through local media and stuff like that, which just adds churn to an already stressful event and stressful time. So, we just get ahead of our forecast times and ahead of our coordination through our planning.
Great. Great. Kelly, same on your side. I know you, in some of the conversations out in the past, you've mentioned a lot of this is handled more at the local level. How do you guys manage that in kind of overseeing that the local level is actually following what's going on out there?
Yeah, our business obviously is not as large, or we don't have drivers on the road, so it's a bit different the way we focus, how we use the Everbridge suite. I will say, just an example, the key reason we developed a GSOC specific to Whole Foods Market was we had a significant winter storm a few years ago here, and in Austin we don't normally get winter weather, so people weren't really prepared for how bad it would be, and it took the city out for about 5 days, which resulted in power outages. Our flagship store completely lost power, and as well as our data center. So our data center for the entire company point of sale is here in Austin, and it went down for 2 or 3 days. And needless to say, that was not a good situation. People were all over social media. We had brand degradation. We had customers coming to the store. It was closed, and they were out on the roads that they shouldn't have been. So it was a challenging situation. So we realized at that point we needed a GSOC. We needed these plans in place. We needed a suite of tools that would help us be more predictive in preparing for it, being clear on our process and communication. So that's how we got where we are today. And then we just continue that, and we learn, every year with the significant weather that keeps happening. And we do rely a lot in that situation on the local power company to, we've established relationships with our local law enforcement to understand where we need to go to get immediate information for priority events like this. So while we don't have this similar situation as Amazon does with government or things like that, we are much more on a local level, and we've established relationships through our process here at Whole Foods.
Great. Sounds good. So Kelly, continuing on that, can you provide a little more insight onto what are the different products you deployed, how you're using them? So, you've got your risk intelligence feeds. Do you use anything around your community engagement, or are you focused more on your employee communications and your business continuity plans?
We focus a lot on business continuity. When we started this effort, there was a lot of inconsistency. So we had to really pull everyone together across our location base to make everyone understand we need to respond to these in the same way, so everyone's consistent. We understand the escalation path. We get the support we need. So we, BCC is our risk intelligence. We use that across the board to both for automated notifications, but just to proactively track things that are happening, especially in our more dense metros. We also use our the Everbridge CEM a bit differently than a lot of customers, from what I understand. So we've configured the mobile app and given it to all the leadership in our stores. That way they can alert us when something happens there on the ground. That way people are constantly in communication. The stores have immediate support depending on what kind of issue is. If it's an operational issue, if it's a safety issue, if it's weather, it automatically texts the right support teams here, and they can call them back immediately. So we've really kind of made the app our own, and it's working very well for us. And then to turn around to communicate out in a more broad fashion. Okay, there's a tornado warning, shelter in place, or there's a hurricane that hit last night. Team members don't go into work tomorrow. We use the mass notification module of the Everbridge products to then message back out to our employees what the next steps are.
Very good. Matt, same on your side. What are the different solutions you're using as far as, from the business continuity, the employee notification, your risk feeds, and how do you tie those all together?
Yeah, so it's principally within within the risk feeds is pretty much where we've landed in the value add for our relationship with Everbridge within the last mile space that I'm in. And so I kind of elaborated on how we're leveraging VCC for that overall situational awareness. We worked with Everbridge over the last year to develop an API. We're a tech company. We like to build our own tech that ties to our internal tools. And so where we've found some success in the last year is getting Everbridge to develop an API that we can then internally consume into a disruption management tool that's tied to our some of our internal tools. And so that's going to enable better scalability, better single source of truth for hazard identification, and then post-event analytics. As we look at events year over year, we're really interested in how events are both affecting us from a safety space. Are we seeing incident spike during certain events that we're not aware of? Or are we not seeing certain risks that we thought we were? And so it's really dialing in through the data our overall business continuity plans. We don't necessarily have like a standardized, business continuity plan framework. We're more of an adaptive continuity model in which we seamlessly integrate our continuity objectives and our resilience objectives within the operation. And that's kind of, where our teams landed and found our value.
Very good. And with Amazon being such a large company, do your plans change? Do your monitoring or your inputs and the feeds change when you're talking outside the US? How does your, more of that global footprint look?
Yeah, the global footprint's a little bit more challenging in terms of data availability. We have the luxury of some very, very precise weather forecasts in the US that just aren't in other areas right now. However, we have noticed that Everbridge has put a lot into the common alert protocol. And so we're starting to see more and more global signals that we want to ensure that we're actioning as we kind of build out this program globally. So I guess to answer the question, as what I like about what Everbridge is doing is they're listening to the customer and listening to us when we're finding events that are happening in other countries and then onboarding those signals as soon as they can. And then proactively, Everbridge is out looking for where those signals are to bridge that data availability gap.
Nice. How about the government feeds? I mean, we talk a lot in the US, we share a lot, right? The government shares a ton of information, and outside, that's not always the same case. Have you found it more challenging to better understand, more from the hyper local levels of different areas or different regions, the information sharing potential challenges you might have?
Yeah, like specifically, like looking at some of our European markets, the regulatory environment is a little bit different in the EU and the UK than it is in the US. So we'll see a lot more stringent application of like travel bans and travel restriction levers that we have to obey. Whereas in the US, most of the time they're, hey, we're just cautioning you to not do this, and there's no in certain areas there's punitive action that can be taken if you're not following a travel advisory. And so what VCC has enabled us to do, or Everbridge has enabled us to do, I guess NC4 principally, is identify when those bans are occurring, specifically like looking at Europe, and then we're able to pull levers to mitigate the on-road risk and then the in-turn volume risk that comes whenever you shut a major thoroughfare down for 6, 7, 8 hours or days.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes days. So Kelly, Matt touched a little bit on that travel side. From the whole food side, what information do you get or you rely on, for some of the decisions that revolve around the executive travel? What sources do you look at, what information, and how do you provide that to the executive team?
Currently, we are looking into implementing some aspects of the travel protection program from Everbridge. We're not there yet with our GSOC. As I mentioned, it's fairly new, but we do have a lot of situations, especially with our CEO traveling and, like I said, these PETA protests. he's supposed to speak at South by Southwest next week, so we're going to have our asset protection team accompany him, so they're making sure that he's safe. But as far as Everbridge integration with our travel program, we don't yet have that, and we're looking to implement that this year.
Fantastic. So there's, you're speaking on that from a relatively new perspective, and it's good to hear how, and maybe some of the challenges you guys are going through from an early adoption stage of a GSOC. So there's also probably, let's see, we have 180 so people on the call. How are you, what do you recommend for the early stages of developing or working to improve their continuity plans? Where would you say the starting focus is, and then how would you work to advance those through and give them some better insights?
Like I mentioned before, we didn't have much consistency around emergency response of any kind. So what I did was looked at Florida, for example, for weather. They were very versed in, developing hurricane plans. So we kind of took best practices from across the country, and then brought together the teams within both our corporate level and our field level to help them understand this is the way we want to do this moving forward. Got expertise from each of the teams, made sure people weren't duplicating. That was a huge thing we found, is there was so much duplication of effort, miscommunications, balls being dropped. So it was really pulling together the key players to help us understand who needs to be doing what and when, and how can we facilitate communications, best practices, learnings, things like that. So we did training, we did tabletop exercises, we helped everyone understand how they support each other. So that was our key focus. It took about a year of investigation to get there. And then we asked the business, what are your top needs that you have? So we started rolling out, well, we want to focus on physical safety first. So we rolled out those mechanisms to be able to report and support consistently those significant safety issues. And then we, from an operational perspective for our business, our product, things like that, we started slowly implementing different ways of reporting and tracking and support. Where we are today is we have a pretty robust system, considering we haven't been doing it that long, but the key bedrock of it was getting that continuity in place first, that process, that agreement, that alignment. That's how we were able to stand it up fairly quickly.
Excellent. Now, you looked like you're in agreement with a lot of that. What would your recommendations be for some of the folks?
Kelly hit the nail on the head, especially when you're dealing with, dispersed operations like we are. I sit in our centralized operations team, which are the things that we can generally do centrally, but we do have field stakeholders in a lot of them. So consistency, right? It should look the same every time to that operator in the field. That's how you build confidence. That's how you build trust. You rehearse it. We do, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to be doing our hurricane summit. We've taken it from 20 stakeholders 2 years ago to, we're upwards of 75 now across our business line, and baselining that overall education and knowledge piece. That helps generally get your desired safety outputs that you're looking for when you have that consistent approach, because then you can really look at yourself and ensure that you are doing what's best to mitigate high risk events into lower risk events. And then when it's, the risk is showing that it's still going to remain high, then it becomes a much easier conversation to have when you're looking at safety, and if you're going to need to go ahead and postpone operations. And then, like, from kind of a more strategy and business side of the house, like business and ops side of the house, there's been a few metrics that we've looked at that we've seen degraded performance in, and that's not acceptable. So, we've just taken ownership of, we're going to make these metrics improve through these events, and that's the value add proposition that we're giving back to our network, and ultimately it benefits our field operators and our business execution. So it just kind of helps build that holistic network of trust that we can manage these highly unpredictable problematic events from a safety and an operations perspective, and get the business through it and restore back to business as usual as fast as we possibly can.
Sure. Sounds good. So I'm going to stay there for 1 second, because Kelly already kind of touched upon a question that I had, which was around engaging some of the local government agencies and facilities. So you mentioned, you've got a big exercise coming up. Do you invite some of your government stakeholders? But more importantly, you mentioned earlier about, transporting medication and critical supplies to people, right? So do you work with anyone, or is there a process you look at where you can credentialize some of your drivers or some of your personnel to come in? You know, years ago, we had a situation on the government side where we were hit by a pretty significant storm, right? Knocked out power for quite some time, road debris, things of that nature, and we still needed to get critical supplies. So we started identifying people who would be credentialized, obviously like healthcare workers and things like that, who could be on the roads when we have closed the roads. What does that look like from you guys with such a large logistical company in putting people on the road? You know, do you work within credentialing environments, or is each state and agency kind of different?
Yeah, each state, each municipality, each area is different. And so where we have found, I don't want to call it leverage, but opportunity, is really bringing in our public policy folks, who can then go and work on our behalf when we have these events coming up, who already have those pre-established relationships with whatever government stakeholder that's in the region that can give us better information on, are we being deemed as essential services or not? All right, if not, when can we reasonably get on the road and put pressure or open up the dialogue, I should say, around, hey, we're delivering life essential goods. We need to get these goods out. We really haven't seen a whole lot of that kind of like state and government level pushback against Amazon operating when we're trying to get back out on the road to after these disaster events. Again, for us, it's within the planning and the visualization and the understanding of these are the areas that the government is deemed as under an evacuation, or there's current rescue operations going on. So from a risk perspective, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to be putting drivers in those areas when, to your point earlier, we could be putting ourselves in a situation where we're creating bottleneck, and the people that we're bottlenecking are first responders. And we don't ever want to be doing that kind of work. But a lot of work with our public policy folks and understanding how different governments look at it. We had a study done, and there go my lights again. We had a study done, and from a scalability perspective, it was just all of the legalese and the nuance from area to area is extremely complex.
Yeah, no, I agree. We used to have a emergency support function operate in our in our state EOC that dealt with the private sector and some of those challenges. So good to hear you guys have some of that going on. So we're going to turn to some of the audience questions now. So, we'll go through some of those, but Kelly, I'm going to start with you. What data sources does your organization use for situational awareness? Examples such as, International SOS, National Weather Service, NOAA. Also, from an international perspective, like some of the different data sources you're capturing.
Quite honestly, our international presence is small. We have a handful of stores in the UK and a few spread across the major cities in Canada. So we use there are feeds that specifically come out of those areas that we monitor to localize those notifications as we need to. Clearly, our international presence isn't nearly as large as Amazon's, but we do take advantage of similar, if it's weather, if it's crime, just whatever the local feeds that are available in the areas we have stores.
Excellent. Yeah, I teed that up to you first because I was going to hit Matt with it next, but I want to give him some time. Right, you have obviously a much larger global footprint, so I know you touched a little bit upon some of the data sources, but what do you guys use for that situational awareness?
Yeah, it's the government meteorological agencies that are flowing through. We use for Japan, JMA, I think they're called. For Europe, we use what is it, Meteor Euro or something like that. Whatever, the same data feed that's flowing through. It's just escaping me. Australia, their same national level service. What I have noticed though is as we go more international, those polygonal areas that we're seeing flagged for risk are significantly larger. And whereas in the US, NWS, I think does a bang up job in providing very, very precise polygonal areas that are being impacted. And so like if you look at Australia, you could have like a severe heat thing that stretches from the north of Australia all the way to the south. And so how do you make a business decision, based on that data? I don't necessarily know, but I do know that that's a signal that, we need to have our other data science processes dialed in so that we can understand at a more granular level, I'm talking like zip code, sub-zip code, where we are exactly seeing that risk, so that we can continue to operate our business where we don't have risk, and where we do have risk, we can take the necessary precautions to keep folks safe.
Right. Yeah. So a good kind of takeaway from that is to not have to deal with such large areas, right? I mean, if you can get it a little micro down a little bit, it helps you probably triage a little easier.
Yeah, but
Completely.
at the end of the day, like having those signals coming in and being able to manipulate that data on the back end as a data person who's doing data analysis, it really helps to drive those conversations where you're fighting for prioritization and resourcing to get whatever business end state and safety end state we're trying to get done.
Yeah, I would imagine too, just thinking of that one, publicly available camera feeds are probably helpful as well, right? Being able to actually see and not have to kind of guess just off of data and work as much as that going. Sounds good. So the next question here, for both of you, we'll start, Kelly, with you, is both organizations, you probably have high turnover of staff. How do you ensure that staff know what to do, when and how they join your companies, and do staff recognize the need to simulate disaster type events? I'm assuming, reading into this a little bit, it's probably a trickle down, right? You're probably starting at the top levels and filtering it down, but how do you ensure that information that you're exercising on, probably at the management level, is making its way down to the boots on the ground personnel?
Actually, Whole Foods is probably pretty rare in, maybe not in the retail industry, but both our store teams and our leadership teams at our corporate office are very tenured. So our leadership, our COO has worked his way up from working in a store 20 years ago. So they really already have that intrinsic knowledge of how our operations work in stores. Our leadership across each of our regions that oversee stores, they're in constant communication. They rely on these Everbridge notifications from our mobile app to keep up with their, they may manage 30 stores in a region, but they can constantly know immediately if something's happening in a particular situation. So we do rely a lot on historic knowledge of the business, and that's helped us a lot understand how to best support. And then we've also woven our GSOC and our business continuity model into that, understanding, these are the people we really need to get the subject matter expertise from. Again, to my point earlier, who handles this kind of stuff the best way today? Let's mirror that and duplicate that across the rest of our organization. So we really have taken that knowledge to improve and optimize the programs we have.
Very good. Matt, I'll throw the same one over to you, because you mentioned a lot of gig and contract workers. So how do you manage that?
Yeah, so like specifically looking at like under the roof operations and Amazon associates, right, it then goes back into the plan and the consistency of that plan. Why is that important? We want to decrease the cognitive load on our field operations leaders when these events are going on, so that they have the bandwidth to prioritize that. To prioritize the associate safety, to prioritize the associate communication, right? Because if we're effectively communicating, then we're keeping them safe and abreast. And I would argue that associates not panicking is also something that we need to do from a safety perspective. But then we've also like linked in, our workplace health and safety, emergency action plans and policy into our playbooks, so that we don't have our operators trying to go comb through whatever repository to find the right playbook for the right situation. We provide that to them centrally. And so it's, again, just like commingling, like Kelly said, and bringing in all those subject matter experts to make sure that you actually have a unified action plan, and not just saying that you have a unified action plan. So when time comes, the operations team can prioritize the associate experience and associate safety.
Nice. So just from a curiosity question on my side, when you guys do you have anything that triggers internally where if you see a certain level of turnover, right, you go back and basically start over again, right? Have that review of your policies and plans, maybe throw up a tabletop exercise because the people who have been there for a while may have changed and now it's time to update some new ones.
Current state somewhat, especially like in our field leader and our central operations, like our supply chain leadership and corporate teams. That's what we do through our exercise. The whole first day is just about baselining knowledge. Within the associate population, it's a little bit more challenging because we do experience, those higher turnover rates. And so then it just becomes a matter of ensuring that the right leaders know the plan and the right leaders know where to find the plans and when the plans will be action so that they can go forth and execute from a boots on the ground perspective.
Nice.
I can
Good.
add to
So,
that.
oh, good. Yeah, that'd
I
be
can
great.
add to that a little bit. So our models are a lot different, but to keep our store leadership up to speed, up to date, we just added a new user base that are using that mobile app. They have to understand what the process is, how to use it, when to use it, why to use it. So we do have pretty significant training that we require of them, and we update that about every 6 months or so. And then as far as the support team, leadership team, we do kind of a roadshow, if you will, and we've gotten tremendous support from our senior leadership to really capture their attention. So we re-educate them, remind them, have these tabletop exercises specifically before major weather seasons, hurricane, winter. So again, like Matt said, bring people back together. Maybe you haven't looked at this in a little bit. You haven't had a lot of crises in your area. Let's regroup, figure out exactly what we need to do, make sure we're all on the same page, doing the same things, communicating the same way. So it's just that refresher, I think, to keep it at top of people's minds.
Yeah, it's definitely important, right? Because everything's changing quickly, so we have to follow through. So Kelly, just the next question on here: what protective or proactive measures do you take to vet quick reaction security subcontractors prior to catastrophic local events to protect warehouses and facilities from looting and damage?
So asset protection is one of our strongest partners throughout this, the safety aspect of it, the physical safety. So we have our security guards on the ground are aware of our process. They don't necessarily report issues through our GSOC, but they work very closely in tandem with the store leadership, and we're tied into the security cameras. The security team there, the third-party security team vendors do know the protocol. They're called in immediately. Our asset protection team is our first responder if there is something going on in the store. We do have looting and attempted robberies overnight, fairly common. So we do have a large part of our large metros, specifically in the Northeast, will have issues with mentally challenged people trying to come into the store and injure folks. So we really try to keep a strong relationship. Our asset protection team is very in sync with the local security vendors to make sure that that line of communication is open immediately anytime a threat like that occurs.
Very good. And Matt, how about your side with all the warehouses and you guys do a great job of reporting that I can get my stuff by 7 a.m. the next morning. So what happens when that stuff's no longer available?
Yeah, so that's where our partnership with our GSO comes into play. So we bring those stakeholders into our calls, or if we're having a network level GSO call, right? We have a team that's already got those contractors, those vendors lined up. I'm not specifically aware of their vetting processes to answer that question, but we have a partnership with them, and they procure and get the asset protection that we need on ground based on the risk that we're experiencing.
Very good. So there's a question in here around space weather forecasting feeds. And I know NOAA is pretty much the agency of record when it comes to space forecasts and things like that. But it is something that has to be monitored, right? Because it does affect your satellite. And I'm assuming both of you use satellite for updating location on drivers or updating information. So how does that space forecast potentially interfere with your ability to provide services?
I'll let you take that one, Matt.
Oh, sorry.
So yeah, that's a very great question. Space weather forecasts important, yes. Are we using those in my day-to-day and in our planning processes from like a tactical perspective? No. Are there other teams in Amazon that I work with that are very keen to have that data for specifically, satellite disruption? Yes. So specifically how they're leveraging that data, where they're leveraging that data, I can't really speak to, other than to say that it is something that we have to be aware of, and other teams are working to make sure it's baked into plans.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, typically the space weather forecasts or space weather disruptions are in radio systems, right? Where
Yeah.
you probably both aren't too heavily involved in the radio side, but yeah, the satellite coverage it's never just as DirecTV, right? It's never 100%. So, all right. So Kelly, question for you, as you guys are monitoring all these different feeds that come in, is there a time where you're just focusing and looking at it and saying, this is just too much data to analyze? And does that ever have a negative impact on what you're trying to do?
Yes, that was especially in the beginning. We'd never done this before, like I said, and so we weren't exactly sure what the appetite was for notifications, who wanted to get them, who needed to get them, how often. So a good example of that is a hurricane. Again, we had, the weather monitoring systems, and every time, and these are 24/7 alerts for, our response team. So every time a hurricane changed path or a wind change, they would get like 30 notifications 24/7 in the middle of the night. So we learned really quickly to pull back on that and really honed in on what they need to know, when they need to know it. As far as physical safety goes, put a threshold around our location if something happens within a predetermined area. So it took some time, it took some trial and error to find out, what notifications were too much. We didn't want all this noise. And then what happens is something really serious happens and they miss it because they're, overwhelmed with getting too many of these. So we've really tailored those notifications, timing, audience, and threat, severity of threat.
Very good. Yeah. So I'm going to take the next one because I don't expect either of you to answer this. But the next question is, does Everbridge collaborate with agencies outside the U.S.? Example being the Caribbean. So we actually have several customers in the Caribbean, and we do provide a lot of information specifically to the Caribbean. As that question was being asked, I received an earthquake alert for the Mona Passage, which affected our customers in Puerto Rico as well as the U.S. Virgin Islands. So we do analyze and capture, and we turn those into alerts for those customers. Typically from the Caribbean for the weather, it's all based on the U.S. Either the USGS, which is the monitoring for the earthquakes, or the National Weather Service, who's providing all the other information. So, all right, so let me go down. I think we're just about out of time. So I'm gonna stop there and thank both of you for your time today. It was great information. I'm sure our audience got a lot of useful information out of that. So we will go through the rest of the questions. We'll try to get answers back out. I'm sure the recording will be available soon and be sent out as well to everyone. But Kelly, Matt, I appreciate your time today and look forward to working with you guys in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for everybody for attending today.